Too cruel for school. Hi, it's Graham here, Grey Ray, Grey Beard, so many options really. I want to talk to you a bit about communication today. As well as being a pre-service teacher and a musician, I'm someone who really likes reading. I don't read as much as I would like, but onwards and upwards. I've got a couple of favourite genres. I like reading stories about technical developments, say how aeroplane design involved, or submarines. I love sci-fi. I like a good espionage novel. I like a good comedy. If you get comedy and sci-fi and espionage together, well, that's about as good as it gets. I'm also really big on histories. I like biographies, historical novels, novels written in other periods of time. And so, for example, Jane Austen is one of my favourite authors. Now, you might think, well, hang on, Graham, she's not really a biographer and she's not even a historian. No, but she is a writer from her time. So anything that you read of hers is going to transport you directly back to that era. Once you work your way through the density of the language, it's just this fascinating insight into the lives of ordinary and not so ordinary people. And she makes the mundane seem absolutely enthralling. It's a real gift. She has great plots. It's like a slow-burning whodunit. You know that the girl's going to get married, but you're not sure whom to, and you're not quite sure who's going to get disgraced in the process. It's a totally different era for the wealthy, tranquility generally, and for everybody, including the wealthy, super high infant mortality. God bless old England. I like Winston Churchill for similar reasons. I've just started reading The World Crisis, which is his multi-volume history on the First World War. It wasn't called the First World War, it was just called The Great War because they'd never had anything quite that big. And I've been reminded, even in the opening pages of those volumes, that just 30 years before that war began, the Ottoman Empire still ruled large tracts of Eastern Europe. And the biggest confrontation that most British could remember that really frightened them was the Napoleonic Wars. In addition to that, of course, Austen and Churchill both have razor-sharp wits, an extraordinary way with words, and they don't have any great hesitance about tearing strips off people who they don't respect. It's reasonable to assume that Austen had almost certainly read absolutely everything that her contemporaries had written. Churchill was a famously voracious reader. So let's recap some of the things that I quite like about good communication. It's intelligent, it's funny, it's insightful, it's compelling, usually the author is very knowledgeable about their subject, and it's occasionally savage, but the author is no more savage than really is necessary. So, as well as writers, I follow a lot of people on Twitter, and some of the most interesting people I follow on Twitter are actually writers as well. So they're typically much more well-read than I am. They, again, would have a way with words, which is simple, economical, insightful, and poetic. They take time to write tweets that aren't just interesting, they're compelling, but they're not necessarily flamboyant. They're not afraid to make fun of themselves. When they disagree with other people, they usually use humour rather than rudeness. They tend to not get into hysteria, and they quite often, and this is uncommon today, don't tweet about politics. Sometimes, but not often. So it got me thinking, what does quality communication look like in the social media landscape? There's a great deal been written about this and a lot said about it, so I wouldn't imagine I know I'm not the first person, but here's just my reflections. So, for example, I don't think frequency of communication makes a good tweet or necessarily a bad tweet. For instance, I follow a bunch of teachers on Instagram, and a lot of them have stories, not tweets, obviously Instagram story, but they might post several stories a day. Some of them have stories that take like multiple stories to actually get their video loaded. But what they're doing is they're building communities of shared interest, and the stuff that they're uploading isn't really earth-shattering, but it is quite interesting for those niche readers. And they're not really criticising anybody, they're not throwing shade. What they're doing is they're dialoguing, they're having a narrative. On the other hand, you only want to hear from a tsunami warning centre if a tsunami is imminent. So frequent communication can be good, infrequent communication can be bad, and actually vice versa. I'm sure that's not hard for you to come up with an example there. So frequency is really a function of the kind of message that you're interested in doing and the purpose of the communication. If it's important, but only sometimes important, then the frequency can be quite low. If it's not critical, but it's building a tribe, it needs to have pretty high frequency, but the content doesn't have to be very, very high content. So let's talk about content. Community building content like an Instagram story can have very low production value and it can still be entirely fit for purpose. Whereas, say, an award-winning photographer might edit a shot for months before they're willing to post it. That's because they've created a tribe that has a certain expectation about their content. Then there's humor, cleverness, for instance. So say a 10-word bon mot by Stephen Colbert beats the average eBay listing. Then there's the nature of the content itself. Now, I'm going to make a comment here that's simultaneously political and at the same time absolutely not political. Content is content. An abuse can be funny or it can be a substitute for content. It depends. So here's a good tweet. It's a book list published by a retired senator. This person tweets quite a lot about agency, grassroots politics, his family and community, but he also posts quite a few tweets like this which are cultural signposts. They're not taking shots at other politicians, they're not even about any kind of political association at all, they're just pointing people at higher learning. And on the other hand, Twitter is awash with examples of tweets that you wouldn't want to clean your toilet with. They're cruel, they're biased, some of them are non-factual, some of them are outright lies. Some are even created by computer programs with the explicit aim of misdirecting you from reality. Just think about that for a second. There are people who write software programs with the explicit purpose of convincing you that you know less about reality than the software program. Yeah, nah. You'll see bad tweets on all points of the socio-cultural compass. There isn't one kind of person or one political orientation or one demographic who speaks or writes poor quality communication. Conversely, anyone can communicate better. So here's my thought. Be well read. Read the thing that interests you and then read as many books as possible as you can around that topic so that you can broaden your knowledge on the subject. Befriend good writers. Now, they might be dead, but you can still read all their stuff. You can make a friend of them if you know what I mean. If you can and they're alive, go and meet them. Or if you can't do that, follow them online. Quite a few of them have Twitter presences. And you know who else you can follow is librarians. Go and talk to those people, have a conversation, say, this is what I'm into, this is what I've just read, what do you recommend next? Because that's like their job. Read good writing, and by good I mean read stuff that's well written, it's got a compelling turn of phrase, it's well researched, it's peer reviewed if that's relevant, and develop an appreciation for really good style. And then write some more. Write your own writing. I'm not a bad writer, but then I've been doing it since I was in school, and I could get a lot better, but that'll only happen as I keep writing. And give cruelty the swerve. Now, there is an exception, and that is, as I say, if you're a humorist by profession. So here are Jane Austen and Winston Churchill again, and here's a random assemblage of a few of my favourite humorists. If we were to map these people on a scale of lazy to hardworking, low energy versus high output, how many books they've read and how culturally literate they are, all of them would fall roughly about here. Now, I get that those are four measures all at the same time on the one scale, so it kind of doesn't work, but you do get the idea. If I were to map how crass these people were, let's call that the shade factor, say, well, they will start to spread out. If I add the retired senator, they're up in here. Super smart, very well read, prodigiously hardworking, and again, I've not even told you what party they're from or even what country they're from. But in terms of their speech, they're very conservative, they're quite respectful. Now, Ricky Gervais is out here, and if you notice, Jon Stewart, Tina Fey, Amy Poehler are all hovering just behind him. Stephen Fry, on the other hand, is way back over here. Very smart, scarily well read, he's an author himself, but not given to personal invective in public, in spite of the fact that he cops quite a lot of criticism for some things. Now, in here, this, I would suggest, is the low value area. These are people who might have a lot to say, but they're not particularly well read. They may or may not even be open to the idea of book burning. Often their commentary is very personal, it's frequently deeply insulting, but they haven't put the work in to craft a very intelligent message that's going to stand up to a lot of scrutiny. So they're being rude, but without the ethics or kindness or the humility to make it funny. It's just insensitivity trying to pass itself off as brilliance. And in Radioland, we call these people shock jocks. In schoolyards, we know them as bullies. In relationships, they're the ex. In psychology, we call them narcissists. In politics, we call them blowhards. Don't be that person. So here's my quick multi-factor analysis of some of the attributes of quality communication. Is it exhaustive? No, but Gibbon sure is. Would you like to apologise for interrupting this video halfway through? Would you? I didn't think so.